Good morning, everyone. I will call to order Marin Waters Watershed Committee and Special Board Meeting of June 12th, 2025. Terry, if we could have roll call, please.
Good morning. Director Diana Mayer,
Present.
Director Larry Russell is here. Just letting you know. Also Director Jed Smith,
Here.
Vice Chair Matt Sampson,
Here.
and Chair Ranjiv Kush.
Here. Do we have any board or public comments on today's agenda?
There are none.
Then do we have a motion to adopt today's agenda?
So moved. Second.
Roll call vote, please, Terry.
Director Mayer,
Aye.
Director Russell, Director Russell. Okay. Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice Chair Sampson,
Yes.
and Chair Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
Terry, do you have any public comments on items that are not on today's agenda?
There are none.
Okay, then we'll move into the agenda, starting with item 4A, which is approval of our Watershed Committee and Special Board Meeting minutes from March 20th, 2025. The minutes are included in today's meeting packet. Do we have any public comments on our previous meeting minutes?
There are none.
Can I have a motion, please, to approve our previous meeting minutes?
Moved. Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Director Mayer,
Aye.
Director Russell, Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice Chair Sampson,
Yes.
Chair Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right. Item 4B, watershed wildfire modeling. Welcome, Sean and Carl.
Yeah. Good morning, directors. I'm Sean Horn, Director of Watershed Resources, with Carl Sanders, our Natural Resource Program Manager. We're going to pull up the presentation for this item for you this morning. So I'll just remind us that a couple months ago at a Watershed Committee meeting, we had a really good presentation around wildfire pathway modeling and how it can be utilized to help agencies and communities assess risk on their landscape and how it can help prioritize vegetation management in strategic locations. So what we've been able to do over the last couple of months is work with Willow Labs and the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority to do a wildfire pathway analysis for the watershed. And we're going to present some of the outcomes from that modeling effort to you today, and specifically looking at that pathway modeling in relationship to some of the BIFIP stewardship actions that have been carried out over the last 5 years, as well as some of the outcomes from that modeling that is helping to inform some of our treatment refinements moving forward. So as a reminder, the Biodiversity Fires and Fuels Integrated Plan, or the BIFIP, was adopted by the board in 2019, giving the district a new tool to update our vegetation management activities from our 1994 plan. The district also completed a study in 2023 with some funding from the Coastal Conservancy in some of our pilot areas on the watershed where we were doing forest resiliency treatments to develop a more refined fuel model and better understanding of fire behavior pre and post treatment conditions. And so that's been a critical piece of this modeling effort as well. In this last year, we brought in a technical expert to talk to us about wildfire pathway modeling and how it can be utilized. And then recently, the district, in partnership with the One TAM partners, completed the forest health strategy, which gave us a better understanding of conditions on the ground throughout Marin County and kind of a science-based framework for understanding how cross-jurisdictional forest resiliency work could be carried out in Marin County. And then over the last couple of years, the district has been scaling up our vegetation management work with funding from the Cal Fire Forest Health Program, Wildlife Conservation Board, and the California Coastal Conservancy. And so what we're presenting today is really a summary of the work completed over the last 5 years, which the district has been able to implement about 7,000 acres of vegetation management under our BIFIP, which is achieving the goals that were set out in that document at the time. And we've been able to do this in great partnership with our community through the use of California Conservation Corps, CC&B, the Fire Foundry, Marin County Fire, and then some of the contracts that we've established to carry out this work. And the map on the top right just shows the kind of geographic area of some of this work that we've been doing over the last couple of years. And one thing to note about that 7,000 acres, a lot of that is maintenance work. So in our BIFIP, there is a reoccurring maintenance cycle for a lot of the actions that we're carrying out. So we are managing just over 20,000 acres of land, but we have not treated half of that land quite yet. We are maintaining a significant portion of the areas that are treated on an annual basis. And the photo on the bottom to the right is just meant to show work in action on the left, and you can see a large pile of brush that was cleared from the understory, and then the post-project condition on the right, which really shows the retention of that kind of oak canopy and the removal of those ladder fuels in that understory. And that's kind of some of the conditions that will be evaluated in this modeling that we're going to present to you. So what is wildfire pathway modeling? It's really looking at the routes where fire would travel with wind, fuel, and topography across the landscape, and trying to understand values at risk associated with that. So you get kind of a understanding of where that fire would travel and how quickly it would travel across the landscape. And then it helps you start to refine and identify areas that could potentially be treated to disrupt those pathways. And so what we've been able to do is place all those BIFIP treatments on the landscape as we've been doing the modeling and produce some outputs for that. So there are strengths and weaknesses associated with any modeling exercise that you go through, and we just want to kind of acknowledge that up front and recognize that this is one tool of many that we're utilizing to help us understand and be more efficient with our resources and how we're applying these treatments. So recognizing that the strengths of this modeling is really recognizing the underlying fuel continuity associated with different vegetation types, the landscape features that might drive the fire growth, the impacts from vegetation or the benefits from vegetation management and how those influence the spread of fire, and then really looking at the rapid spread across that landscape and the residual risk that does exist after you've done treatments is some of the strengths of this modeling exercise. Some of the weaknesses, the inputs really drive the outputs. And so recognizing that the underlying fuel model is a critical piece, we've been able to refine that a little bit based on some of the groundwork that we've done in previous efforts. Also, surface fire is really the focus of this, not so much on ember-based fire. Fire spread is just one component of the overall risk. And then it's not necessarily designed to recreate the historical fires because we can't really mimic those interventions that might have been placed on the ground during a fire. So good to understand as we move forward. Also, the planning scenarios are key. So we did look at the surrounding communities around the watershed, really under these two wind events, whether it be west or a Diablo wind, and then using some of those extreme events that we've seen historically here in Marin as kind of a setting the stage for the modeling exercise and moving that forward. So the modeling of the vegetation, that fuel load under fuel model is really critical to it. So we're not intending for this graphic on the right to really be digested by you today. It just shows the difference when you've been able to do site visits to the sites that you've treated and understand the fuel conditions post-treatment, and then you can change that underlying fuel model based on that data to better refine the accuracy of the modeling exercise that we went through. We were able to do that because we worked with Carol Rice and Esther in 2022 to look at our coastal conservancy work up around Potrero Meadows and do some post-project analysis. That crosswalk was then used to update our fuel model, which was put into the wildfire pathway. And then that logic really drives the output there at the end of the day. So what do we want to show you out of this? This is one of the outputs that you get. So this is looking at the watershed in a northeast wind event. So a fire starts in the community and is coming into the watershed. And all those hatched green areas are where BIFIP treatments have been placed on the landscape. So really what we want to be seeing here is those red lines intersecting with those hatched areas. And so there's an expansive treatment zone around the majority of these pathways that we're seeing come into the watershed. And what we're really pointing out here is the Bon Tempe treatment plant. That's one of the critical facilities that the district has been trying to expand our work around as we've been implementing the BIFIP. And so that is a critical component that we are looking at in this particular output of the modeling. And what we were able to find is that we really reduced the rate of spread to the treatment plant under this scenario by about 10 hours. So that's giving you a lot more time to respond and address, evacuations on the watershed and whatnot. And then in some areas, you are no longer seeing the fire actually reach those parts of the watershed in some of the internal areas. So that's a good sign that some of the work that's being placed on the ground through the BIFIP and the implementation is critical. Another way that we'll be able to use this moving forward is really to prioritize the maintenance on an annual basis, where we're going back and treating to maintain those lower fuel conditions on the landscape. And so there's different outputs like this throughout the watershed that we're able to now use as we continue to plan for future work on the watershed. So similarly, this is a west wind scenario. If a fire was to ignite within the watershed and be moving towards the community of Larkspur, some of the pathways that would be established, and then some of the treatment areas. One thing to also identify is the black dots on here are some of the facilities that the district has. So we have pump stations and tanks throughout the community in the WUI, and so we wanted to include those in our analysis of how we can better protect those features. And similarly, you just see a real benefit to the reduction in speed and the time it takes for a wildfire to get into these different parts of the community, and the disruption that the treatments being placed on the landscape are providing. Carl, you want to add any other thoughts on?
No, I mean, right now we're looking at the central portion of the Mount Tamalpais watershed. The pathway analysis, both for the phase 1 and phase 2, included other areas on the watershed, specifically up north around San Geronimo Ridge, down south around Mill Valley, both of which give us important information on areas that we can target for future work to interrupt the pathways. The work that you're seeing in these slides, I think, validates a lot of the work that we have done. That's great to see, because it's interrupting pathways and slowing arrival times down and increasing the ability of operations for response. So.
Great. And so one of the outputs from the modeling exercise is kind of the residual pathways that could be addressed through, modifications of future treatments or expansion of treatments in different parts of the watershed. And so this is what we're now using to have conversations with our partners on surrounding public lands, as well as with our Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. And on that kind of southern part of the map there, we've been in conversation with MWPA about planned work they have off the watershed and how we can refine some of the work we have planned on the watershed to better disrupt the pathways. So a real collaborative kind of planning effort that's being undertaken through using tools like this. And we are kind of the first example of, placing this type of modeling exercise in relationship to the treatments that have been done under the BIFIP and the investment the districts put into that work. So it's a good tool for us to continue to utilize and refine moving forward. So in summary, the wildfire pathway is going to help us refine our treatments in the future under our BIFIP. We're also supporting cross-jurisdictional planning and implementation of work as we utilize and roll out this tool. And it's informing the district's, priorities around how we can harden infrastructure within the WUI, and considering our seasonal maintenance of those sites and prioritizing them based on the needs. So with that, we'll answer any questions that you might have on the pathway modeling effort.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Carl. Start with board member comments. Diana?
I'm just really glad to see. I just got back from the American Waterworks Association conference in Denver, and while we were there were a lot of speakers from different places where they had wildfire the last couple of years. And one of the things that they talked a lot about, and so I'm really glad to see that you're really thinking about this, is beyond the wildfire spreading, was that the treatment plants would get burned, and then the water would be totally undrinkable at times. There was some where you could boil, and then sometimes even that you just had to basically throw it out. So that's not something we think about a lot when we talk about wildfires. So I'm really glad to see that you're thinking a lot about the treatment plants and focusing on that. So thanks very much.
Matt?
Sean and Carl, thank you very much for bringing this forward and for being open to looking into the value of it, specifically as it relates to our watershed and truthing out the work that's been done as part of the BIFIP actions, but also working with the surrounding agencies, specifically Marin Wildfire, so that everyone's playing from the same sheet of music. We hear all the time, fire doesn't respect district boundaries. And so if we don't have the same sheet of music, it's not good. So first, hats off on the work you've been doing on the BIFIP, and that it's validated on here. And I do like the word refinement because I think this is another refinement to the district's effort to continue our work to reduce wildfire risk on the watershed. The BIFIP was the stake in the ground for us, really giving us a place from which to work from. And this is now an additional layer of information so we can continue to drive from. So it was great to see in reduction in arrival time because, looking at the list of restrictions on this kind of science, the two that jump out right away are the Ember modeling. And unfortunately, there's just not enough Ember modeling going on that's valid that we could actually would want to look at right now. The science just isn't there. But we can anticipate some Ember spread into the watershed over or defeating the work that's been done by the BIFIP when we go east to west on a Diablo event day. And then we would better understand, should something get established, across the line of the moat you put in, what would occur and where you can start looking at stuff, which is really important too. But I think the real value in this is that not for the first time, but relatively new, we have the ability now to measure outcomes, not performance. And if we sit here and try to measure performance, we set our own standard all day long. We can name the number of acres we do, et cetera, et cetera. But what does that mean? And when we actually now have the ability to measure outcome, meaning we have a reduction in arrival time from an intense fire, that holds value. And we can start allocating dollars based on true value. Because Sean, to your point, getting people out and getting the right people in, right now we're completely dependent on time. And although, as noted, speed is one component of this, it's the primary concern in the Mediterranean climate is speed, because most of the big events on the West Coast are very short in duration. We get exposed through risk via a 3 to 4 day wind event. And if it happens on the tail end of that wind event, our risk really subsides once the wind does. We see it over and over again. I mean, the 91 tunnel fire was a 36-hour event that had the most loss of homes. But so reducing the arrival time is good, but also too, it will build on the ability to prevent a fire from being established in the watershed in areas that we haven't gotten to yet for vegetation management. So we don't get these really high intensity fires where all the resources are actually not fighting our fire, but they're fighting the surrounding community. And we get the really nasty outcomes of what's going on when there's too much heat on our watershed too. So again, thank you very much. I'm very excited about this. As we move forward through this, when we start looking at BIFIP updates, if we continue to use this science, it does continue to prove value. It would be good to see how we're reducing arrival times or what other metric you want to use and actually start driving towards outcomes on all the work we're doing. So we understand the value of what's going on for that. And I think when we start doing that or articulating it a little bit better, we'll see a value hopefully in our insurance rates. If we can prove what we're doing on the ground makes sense, the insurance company should see that and should be able to be, the question asked is really, what's the value in terms of our policy on that? So I think it's a really good thing overall. Thank you very much for bringing it forward.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Jed?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, Carl and Sean. I am constantly amazed by the amount of work that we do and the number of acres that we're able to mitigate each year. So that guided by the agency and as well as our incredible volunteer community is something that we should be proud of. I'd love to see a deeper dive into some of the algorithms and modeling that you use to help come up with that 10-hour savings or 6-hour savings. We had a wonderful presentation from the general about a year ago that gave us some really interesting impact models around wind and terrain. So how we're applying that here and what are the different kinds of models that you consider to use to bring that in that will help us mitigate risk in the future would be a deeper dive that I think our community would like to see. I did read the background material, so you do have some good thoughtful work in here. Second, I'd like a deeper dive into the single points of failure that we have. So if Bon Tempe were to be taken out, what are we going to do? If the pipes or the impact of fire, takes out one of our reservoirs due to chemical impact or other, how do we handle it? And I think there are many single points of failure here. I'd like to have, and I think the community would like to see how we're going to handle it. So when some catastrophic event happens, what's our response and how do we go about it? And I think sooner the better would be great to take a look at that. But thank you for the continued work.
Yeah, good points. Larry, is he on?
Yes, he's on.
We'll come back to Larry
Okay.
yeah, maybe just a couple of uh, quick additions, Sean. You know, on the weaknesses of the pathway modeling, you note that they're not designed to recreate past fires, and I'm not sure that we actually have enough information on past fires to be able to determine how well the models align with what was seen in the past. And it could be conditions are so different now that it's hard to really even try to compare past versus current pathways. But just maybe if you could clarify why we, can't use past fire information to somehow validate. And because I think this question of validation is tricky, right? We develop the models, as Jed said, they're based on algorithms with certain inputs, and it's critical to be doing so because we have to prioritize and we have to use information to do that. But hopefully, we won't have events that actually provide the validation or not. I mean, and that's a hard thing. We don't know if we're getting it right until until we have that fire. So where am I going? I guess just do we have any information from past fire events that could help guide this?
Yeah, yes, we do. One of the outputs from the Regional Forest Health Strategy was a document put together on a pretty extensive, if not comprehensive, history of fires in Marin County. And, some of it was from newspaper back in the 1800s. Some of it's from firsthand reports, but it's our best guess at fire footprints in Marin County during colonial times. So it's pretty interesting to see. The last major fire on Mount Tam was 1945. We have a very good idea where that footprint occurred. Prior to that, we had the fire in the late 20s, south side of Mount Tam. We also have a very good idea of when that occurred. And then multiple fires, for example, let's say within Bill Williams Canyon above Phoenix Lake. And the pathways modeling, they did show us some of their validation where their pathway on recent fires, their pathway modeling on recent mega fires approximated or approached, the footprint that they'd had. So that was an interesting validation. I did ask, pathways, the folks doing the modeling, that some of their pathway modeling didn't match what we're, the past footprints that we see. But you make a good point that the vegetation has dramatically changed, in the last 60 years due to all sorts of reasons, disease and weeds and pathogens and such. So, but the modeling didn't take, or it wasn't based on historic fire footprints. It was based on
Right.
current vegetation types that were ground truth, as Sean mentioned, from fuel models, ground truth out from fuel models in the field that we had another consultant take for us. And so that gave us a little bit better in current conditions. It's also using current veg data as well. So,
And that's part of the problem, with the exclusion of fire for so long, we don't have as good of an idea. But if you look historically, you look at the Tubbs fire, you start overlaying that, even the fires down in the Palisades, you look back, history is repeating itself in California. It's just waiting for another opportunity to do so.
and that is the pattern where you would expect to see fires repeat in certain places again and again when all of those elements of the topography, wind, and veg align.
So, right. Yeah. So hopefully the models, the way the different inputs are determined, how they're weighted, continues to be informed by fires that are occurring all the time, and we benefit from those improving models, and we can apply them here, even though validation ideally never happens. We never have that event that allows us to validate, but
So in the past, we have used past fire footprints as one tool to help us establish or plan where to conduct work. And so the pathways now, as a refinement to that and other tools, allows us to adjust even further planned work going forward.
Great, good. Well, I'm glad we're doing it. Terry, public comments, please.
Yes, we have two, Barbara Salzman and Terry Thomas. Go ahead, Ms. Salzman.
Okay.
Hi, thanks for hearing me. I have a question concerning habitat. I know this, what the work is doing is important, but the other side of it is there anything that will remain that is not needing to be treated? I'm sure the models didn't look at that, but there should be maybe in effect some lands remaining that they indicate are not terribly or not at all, or that's likely because this fire could spread in many ways, but that really don't need to be treated, so that we're going to have some long-term habitats remaining in the watershed. And is it possible to create a simple map along those lines?
Thank you, Ms. Salzman. We'll just go ahead and take those questions down. Do you have any further comments?
No, it looks
All right,
good.
thank you. I have to move on then. Go ahead, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you so much. My name's Terry Thomas. I'm an ecologist and natural resource management specialist, and I have a master's in prescribed fire and how it restores the landscapes. I really want to applaud the board and the staff, and in particular, Director Sampson and Sean and Carl, for being a leader in this modeling approach in Marin County. And I think it's a big step forward. As the one comment that I have is that in Chief Winokur's slides that he had given both at your, I think it was both at your board meeting and also at other meetings around the county, it included an overlay of sensitive habitats and biodiversity that would also show that particular value and how it would be affected as the wildfires would go through the landscape. I think that would be an important overlay for you all to include, to show that those strong areas that are supported by both your mission and your policy 7 would be protected as well from these wildfires. And it doesn't have to actually identify what is in those habitats, because I know it's very sensitive information, but just that by also using these models, you're protecting the values of the watershed on the ground as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. There are no further speakers.
Sure. Could I say just?
Yeah, yeah,
comment?
of
So I
course.
think one of the things that was being highlighted is the value of this pathway work in terms of other competing priorities on the watershed for the landscape. And we don't need to go with a broad brush and just go nuclear. We have the ability to refine and actually make a few trade-offs based on other priorities for it. So it's just another value add to the work. So thank you.
Yeah. And Terry, I understand Larry, if he does, he can't join as a panelist, but if he does have a comment, he'll raise his hand.
Yes, I've actually unmuted him. He'll say something if he needs to.
Great. Okay. Okay. Hope you heard that, Larry. All right. But I think then we're ready to move on to our next item. Shauna, I guess that's you again. We're going to discuss 2 proposed 3-year general service agreement contracts beginning in our upcoming fiscal year 2026 that are related to implementation of our biodiversity, fire, and fuels integrated plan.
Yeah. Thank you. Sean Horn, Director of Watershed Resources. We're joined with Lauren Jenkins, our project coordinator, and Carl Sanders again. So the item before you is 2 contracts that we're looking to renew to support our biodiversity, fires, and fuels integrated plan. And to present kind of the context of these 2 contracts, we're going to hand it to Lauren to walk you through the existing contracts we have that we'll be updating because they are terming out and what we're trying to replace them with.
Good morning, board. Again, Lauren Jenkins, Watershed Project Coordinator. I'm here to introduce the two new contracts that we're actually have out for bid right now. Both contracts are ones that are replacing existing contracts. So they're kind of renewals. The first one is a maintenance contract. It also has a small component for trails. The second is a forestry contract, and it also includes a component for pile burning support. So both contracts so far have been successful in the past to help implement the BIFIP and the objectives that we have in that document. Both contracts, the existing contracts are expiring at the end of this month in June. So we have a deadline there. And the maintenance contract that we have in place was with Forrester and Kroger. The forestry contract that we're replacing is currently with Bay Area Tree Specialists. Both of those companies have been, very successful in their work, and we're very happy with their finished products. The award will be given to the lowest qualified bidder. The maintenance contract, we're expecting a fiscal impact of about 5.8 million. That will be over 3 years. And the forestry contract will, we're expecting about 3.7 million over 3 years as well. Funding will be covered by a combination of operational funds, capital funds, and some grants that we have with Wildlife Conservation Board, CAL FIRE, and hopefully some additional grant funds. So that's the summary. Questions?
Great, thank you, Lauren. Jed, any?
Yeah,
Any
this is just
comments?
not for approval here, just understanding and comments, right?
You and
Yep.
That's correct.
Right.
We're review and comment, and
Yep.
we come back to the full board
Yep.
meeting.
Makes sense. Thank you for the report.
Matt?
How are we doing on pile burning? I think that's the question is that, obviously this is really important work, and the sooner we get to this, we get to the next level, which I'm really excited to do. So I'm just curious to see how these are going to help support us move past the pile burning.
Do you want to talk through some of the pile burning successes here, Lauren?
I've got a few numbers. I think we started the fiscal year with about 14,000 piles. We have burned 3,000 this year, which is fantastic for us. But we tend to generate more piles every year than we burn. So
Yeah.
that is a challenge. One of the biggest challenges right now is most of our piles that we have are in northern spotted owl habitat, and the nesting season for the owl and the pile burning season kind of overlap, and so we have some challenges there to work through. And we hope that some of the equipment and capacity that we build with this contract, specifically the forestry and pile burning contract, will help us kind of work through those challenges.
Great, thank you. And then do either of these contractors offer prescription fire or prescribed burning if we did get to that point, or is that something we even want to not consider at this point?
So the contract allows us to utilize this contract to support the mop-up work. That's kind of how we're identifying this contractor's role in a prescribed fire, is
Great.
to really support those overnight patrols that we want to do on the watershed for the duration after the prescribed fire.
Great, thank you for that.
And then I'll just note that, we have been successful in working with this contractor over the last couple of years to scale up the pile burning operations. As Lauren mentioned, there are some seasonal restrictions that we have to abide by, but the renewal of this contract will allow us to continue to kind of increase the pace and scale of that. And then Lauren's gotten very creative where we haven't been able to, burn all the piles, that we've gone back and masticated some piles in various locations as well. So a combination of tools is going to allow us to start to catch up on our piles.
Thanks, Matt. Diana, any comments?
No, you could bring some of those piles to my house, though. My dog would go crazy with them. She'll eat them right up.
Larry Russell, any additions? No. Okay. Thanks a lot for the update. Obviously, this is work that we, know is critical. We want to see it continue. So, having a plan for renewal of both of these activities is important. Thanks, Lauren, for the update.
Oh, we do have a public comment.
And public comment, sorry.
Okay. Miss Barbara Salzman, please. Actually, and Renee Voss, I apologize also. Go ahead, Miss Salzman.
At Barbara Salzman again from Marin Audubon Society. I have another question. Maybe you don't answer questions at this meeting. I don't come to it much, but I'm not against pile burning. I think it's important that you do that, but I'm wondering about the district's protocol for making sure that any wildlife or small creatures that take refuge in those piles between the time they're placed and burned are in fact eliminated or scared away from within the piles before they're burned. They're sometimes the only refuge with the vegetation that's removed, and I expect that there are some protocols. I know other districts have them, so if there are any, I'd like to know either on or offline here. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Salzman. Next is Miss Renee Voss.
Yes, Mr. Renee Voss.
Mr. I apologize, sorry.
All right, happens all the time. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. And I just wanted to add, in the northern spotted owl areas where they're producing piles, has there been any thought given to, instead of producing piles, is lopping and scattering the material so it's below 18 inches rather than having it in piles, so you don't have to go back and do the burning, or the areas are then prepared for prescribed burning. If you're going to go back and do chipping in those areas after the fact anyway, after the owl nesting season is ended, you might as well do it to begin with, and allow the material to decompose into the soil rather than putting it out in the atmosphere anyway. So just I wanted to see whether any thought had been given to using a different methodology or method of treating these materials rather than piling and burning.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Great. Well, thanks for the public inputs. And Terry, where appropriate, maybe we can provide additional information to them.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thanks again then, Lauren. Carl, Sean, I guess you're still with us for our next agenda item.
Can I say one thing, Ranjeev? Just if Ms. Salzberg is still listening, what we generally do is take the questions and we get you an answer and we send you an email or call you. So you will get an answer. We just don't always answer it during the board meeting.
Great. Thanks, Diana. Okay, item 4D, which is a review of the latest watershed landbird study conducted by Point Blue Conservation Science under our BIFIP. Welcome, Renee.
Great. So we'll start this item with you. This is our triennial landbird data that we were able to utilize to do a study that was specifically around our BIFIP actions and our treatments, essentially overlaying where we've done treatments on the landscape and analyzing those point counts in relationship to areas that have not been treated to understand any changes in landbird abundance and richness there. And one thing we'll just note is as part of our implementation of the BIFIP, there's a whole suite of environmental best management practices and measures that are applied to the landscape. And in regards to pile burning, all surveys are done for birds and wildlife prior to burning those piles. That's a measure that's outlined in the BIFIP, as well as before we do any vegetation management, there's a whole suite of actions. And as Lauren was alluding to in his presentation with northern spotted owls, there's buffers around those. We do a whole host of treatments on the landscape, from pulling broom to cutting and masticating vegetation, as well as lop and scatter and pile burning. So the whole suite of management tools that you kind of hear about in terms of this work is being applied under the BIFIP, and different sites require different kind of actions on the landscape. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Renee, who's going to walk us through the study that Point Blue has done for the BIFIP in the last year or so.
All right. Thank you, Sean. It's good to be here today. Thanks for having me to talk about the study. Before I get started, I will acknowledge that a few Point Blue colleagues also worked on this report very deeply. Christy DeBala, Autumn Iverson, and Diana Humpel, and I'm presenting on behalf of that team. This one, yeah. All right, so the landscape in Marin County has changed over the last 150 years due to factors like disease, such as sudden oak death, reduced frequency and acreage of fires we've heard about today, and the spread of invasive species. And these changes can ultimately increase the risk and severity of fire. So Marin Water's Biodiversity, Fire and Fuels Integrated Plan, or BIFIP, has three stated goals of one, minimizing risks from wildfire. Two is to preserve and enhance significant biological resources. And three is to provide an adaptive framework for periodic review and revision. Of course, with these increased management, vegetation management practices around California, it's very important to evaluate their impacts on biodiversity. So in this study, we evaluated short-term landscape scale changes in the breeding landbird community on Marin water lands that are attributable to the BIFIP management actions. As Sean mentioned, we used the long-term data, existing long-term landbird data, and looked at survey points both before implementation of BIFIP in 2019, as well as point after implementation in 2022.
Renee, is that what you're using as the short-term timeframe?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so I should say this encompasses 2 survey years because we are surveying on a triannual basis. So our pre-data is 2019, post-data 2022. We looked at survey areas without any treatment, our control points, and we also looked at areas that are treated. And within the treated group, we subdivided those into 4 different categories of treatment, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. We used the point count data again from the long-term monitoring program to evaluate both the community metrics of landbirds, so overall bird abundance at these points, as well as the total number of species or species richness. Then we also evaluated individual species abundance for 27 different species. And within these survey locations, so the map here shows the Marin water footprint kind of lightly in blue. The pink and green polygons are the BIFIP vegetation treatment plots that occurred during the study period, so between 2019 and 2022. And the points on the map represent the bird survey locations. So those are distributed throughout Marin waterlands, throughout different habitat types. They were established in 1996, so they weren't specifically established to evaluate BIFIP. That is why there's not an even distribution of points throughout the plots. But the blue points are the control or the untreated areas. They did not have a treatment within at least 100 meters. The yellow points are the treated points, and those had some level of treatment within 50 meters of the point. And the 50-meter radius is the area of which we did the bird analysis. And so that was our goal for looking at the level of treatment. And let's see, anything else to say about this slide? There are some lighter gray points on the map that are part of the long-term study that weren't included in this specific analysis. So the different treatment categories were based on the management actions outlined in Marin Water's BIFIP. Because of sample sizes, we did combine some of the management actions into groups that we thought would be important for birds. So thinking about structure and plant species impacted. So the non-native understory removal category was included management actions where they were specifically targeting non-native invasive species, often broom, sometimes goat grass or other priority weeds. The general understory removal could potentially include both non-native and native species. Those were for management actions that didn't target a specific plant. So something like roadside mowing would be included in general understory removal. Douglas fir thinning was its own management action, or is its own management action in the BIFIP. That typically includes smaller Doug firs, can include taller trees, usually less than 12 inches of diameter, trunk diameter, and some larger trees. The mixed layer fuels reduction category could include modifications to both overstory and understory plants. Now, again, because these points were set up prior to treatment, we used points, generally speaking, that didn't necessarily have 100% treatment area in the area that we analyzed bird data. So the way that we analyzed the bird data was to look at the mean extent treated for each treatment category. So the image in the bottom right here shows a bird survey point in the middle of the figure. That kind of light purpley blue shading circle is our analysis area. And the darker pink in the background is the treatment area. So in this particular case, we looked at a 31% area was treated within that same area that the birds were analyzed. So the range of mean extent treated that we used in the analysis were from 18 to 72%, depending on the treatment category. We used a statistical framework that basically allowed us to look at the probability of a positive response, a negative response, but also allowed us to distinguish when we were uncertain versus when we could confidently say with precision that there wasn't a large effect on birds. So moving into some of the bird community results, just to orient you to the figure. So across the top, the columns show the different management, the different treatment categories from non-native understory removal to mixed layer fuels, as well as a year column. And the year column is where we analyzed the change in abundance and species richness between 2019 to 2022 for birds at control points, so at those untreated areas. This is because we know there's annual variation in bird numbers, and we wanted to account for that. So the results that I'm showing for the treatments are on top of the changes that we saw for abundance. And so for the bird community, we did not find any negative effects of the management actions on either community abundance or species richness. We found no large effect for non-native understory removal or general understory removal, as well as mixed layer fuels on community abundance. We found a possible positive effect of Douglas fir thinning and mixed layer fuels reduction on species richness. The only unknown that we had on the community abundance or bird community metrics was for Doug fir thinning on the overall abundance. That one was uncertain. And there was an increase, so more birds and more species at points in 2022 compared to 2019. But as I mentioned, these no large effect and possible positive effect are on top of those increases. So in terms of looking at these 27 individual species, I'm not going to go through them all, but we'll just give you some sort of broad take-home results here. So this figure is laid out in the same way as the community metrics with the different management types across the top. The individual species are each represented by one row, and then the species are grouped by their primary habitat affiliation when they are on marin waterlands. So species that are in conifer or conifer mixed with hardwood forest, species that are in multiple forest types, oak woodland, scrub chaparral, and then generalist species are defined as species that use 3 or more habitat types on marin waterlands, but not necessarily favoring one strongly over the others. In general, the individual species results were complex and variable, but I will kind of highlight some of the patterns that we saw. So by treatment type, there were more species that we detected with a positive response compared to negative responses for Douglas fir thinning. Species were more or less even for non-native understory removal and mixed layer fuels, with about the same number of species having positive and negative responses. More species had negative compared to positive responses for the general understory removal. When we looked at species by habitat guild, we found that more species responded positively to more conifer and mixed forest species responded positively to the treatment effects compared to those that were responding negatively. But the oak woodland and scrub chaparral species, we had more negative detections than positive for those 2 groups. There were 12 species that we could estimate a response to a treatment for more than one treatment type. And of those, over half, so 7 of the 12 species, had opposing responses to different treatments. So we're not always going to see the same response depending on treatment. So I think that's an important takeaway of like considering the details of the treatment types. And of course, the number of uncertain species and categories were high, and that's due to a small sample size with many of these individual species. So we certainly were able to get more robust results, more complete results for those community indices.
Renee, before you move on, there's so much here. There was a complicated study, and I have to keep reminding myself, your results are based on comparisons of controls to treatment points. So that obviously helps to reduce just general trends that are occurring regardless.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's part of the, we wanted to do a before and after control impact study so that we could really compare. We, I don't go into all the details of the model, but we did incorporate, what is the, habitat type, what's the forest cover across points, because we know there's higher number of species in forested areas than in non-forested areas, and looked at those differences even between control and treatment points before all the treatments as well. So that allows us to understand these changes being attributable to the BIFIP.
Right. Reduce other
variables.
Other variables.
Yeah.
But there's still like, I remember when you presented just the long-term study last year, you noted some declines that were real, like, for example, for I think the scrub jay, you said that had been declining year over year for some time now. And when I look at oak woodland species, those set of rows for the California scrub jay, I can see negative effects for most of the treatments.
Yep.
Yet there's a large positive effect for the annual changes. That doesn't seem to align.
Yeah, so this is kind of the interesting part about, the survey points are only a small number of the points that we survey each year. And California scrub jay, and I can note that the species listed on the right, the names that are in bold are those that had declining long-term trends in our previous report since the 90s. And scrub jay was one that's a good one to point out. It's one that we specifically highlight in the report as a species to watch for because of these negative responses to 3 of the 4 treatments. That said, most of the species had an increase between 2019 and 2022. And the declines, we looked at both the declines attributable to the BIFIP as well as net change in birds. And there were 2 species that had a negative net change between 2019 and 2022, despite some of the negative responses here. So that was like the overall net change. That said, with things like scrub jay, that could be something in terms of a management recommendation to Marin Water, or like further study, further investigation. And this is a year that we are surveying. It's our triannual year where we're out there doing the long-term monitoring, and so we'll know more about whether this upward tick of the scrub jay persists, or if we see a change in that species.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So finally, this is the first study evaluating impacts of the BIFIP treatments on marin waterlands for land birds, and to our knowledge, the first evaluation of forest health and fuels reduction strategies in Marin County. Additional study would certainly enhance our understanding of these effects. So longer term, how birds are doing after more time after treatment, being able to evaluate higher treatment extents since we were limited to pre-existing data points, as well as measuring other species and metrics, such as changes to the plant community, soils, or even bird species that we didn't include in this study, northern spotted owls. The increased efforts to reduce fuels and fire risk in California requires evaluation of how different species respond so that land managers can adapt. And this study represents an important initial step toward that understanding for Marin. And I want to thank Marin County for funding and supporting, or Marin Water for funding and supporting this study, as well as the staff who really helped us interpret the vegetation management data. That was very essential. So I can take any additional questions.
Thank you, Renee. Diana, do you want to start?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Renee. Could you just say a little bit, I want to take you deep into the weeds, but could you just say a little bit about the algorithm, or maybe it's just a process that you use to determine, what is a change as opposed to, that's due to our actions, as opposed to like, seasonal or a fluke, or, how does that work?
Yeah, so we used kind of some pre-existing approaches. A similar approach to what we use in the long-term monitoring report to assess whether or not the change that we're seeing is a real increase or decline. And so we look at the magnitude of the change between the 2 years. So was it a greater than 30% change? And then we look at the precision of our estimate. Are the increases and decrease kind of spread across the board for a certain point, or for the suite of points at a certain management action? Or are we pretty confident in terms of the confidence interval around that and the spread of the data? Are they all saying the same thing, or all at least, mostly all saying the same thing? Does that help?
Yeah. And then I noticed on one of the slides, there were a few species where you did notice a negative effect, and then overall, not a strong negative effect. So were you just sort of averaging it out, or how did you come to the conclusion that there was no strong negative effect overall?
So the year column is separate from any of the management actions. So if we found a positive effect of the year, that's unrelated to the treatment. So if you saw the purple boxes relative to that management action, then we considered that a negative response to that management action. Yeah.
Thank you.
Matt?
Renee, thank you for the presentation. And Sean and Carl, deep gratitude for even coming up with this really novel approach to see what we're doing as we are tasked with reducing wildfire risk on the mountain while also looking at environmental preservation. And as we move forward, and we're paying off the sins of the past for exclusion of fire in this mountain for so long. And I think as we start to return it to its natural state, and that's a big hurdle because most people assume what they're looking at today is the way Mountain Tam's always looked and everything's been good and all that, but really not understanding that it's moving towards unhealthy quickly. And as we try to move the needle back to the middle, how do we do it and understand the implications of our actions? And this is helping to do that. And even though it's just a preliminary study, it's the first time, it is showing a lot of good results based on what you're doing. So again, hats off to having another form of science validate the work that you're already doing. It would be nice to have this, if we can, incorporate into our triennial study as just an addendum or however you see fit as we continue to move forward, because this is really showing good signs, but it might also show that we have an area of work that's maybe not in the best interest of a habitat, and we can alter and change that so that we can incorporate all the different competing priorities for that. So thank you very much. And it would also be interesting under the treatment category methods at some point, hopefully sooner or later, we actually have prescribed fire in there and to show that how it's affecting the bird populations too. And then just lastly, I would encourage, actually my first question would be, has any other land managing agencies starting to take the same type of approach specific to what we're doing? Are we out in front on this?
I'd say we're out in front,
Awesome.
and we're going to continue the conversation, continue the conversation with Point Blue on building a more robust study. This was initial. We only have 1 year worth of BIFIP data held up against 30 plus years worth of triennial data.
Yeah.
And robust results come from long-term studies. So we'll need to think about how to expand on this work.
Well, no, and duly noted, but the fact that you're starting is the important part. So appreciate it. And I'd also encourage too, if you have the opportunity to share this at a forum, symposium, whatever else that's going on, because I think this probably could be duplicated across numerous land management agencies. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Jed?
Yeah, great. Well, I guess I'll start by seconding Matt's request to have this as a part of a regular study that is presented here at Marin. I want to give a shout out to Terry Thomas. The idea of doing this for me first came from her, and we brought it up in a board meeting, and you guys responded extremely well. So I am very appreciative that we're doing this. So often we study rare spotted owls and California ridgeway rails and other species that are endangered or in danger. But what I love about this is looking at the general bird health, and too often we don't pay attention to the importance of land birds as a both sign of the health of our ecosystem and biodiversity and this beautiful place that we seek to protect. It seems to me from your study that all of the bewick's, wrens, and vireos and juncos and Vienna's hummingbirds came to my neighborhood in Mill Valley. I don't know, maybe they've disappeared because of this work, but they all came down to us. So they're very present. So thank you for doing this study. I encourage any of the board members and anyone in this audience to join one of the Point Blue surveys. It's remarkable work. These are true science-based, data-focused folks. I'm proud to be working with you guys, and I look forward to looking at the trend data in the future to see how we can better manage our land, both through fire risk mitigation and in general taking care of the important native species and habitat. Thank you.
Thanks, Jed. Larry Russell, no comments. Yeah, my thanks as well, Renee, for all the hard work. When you started showing data on slide 6, and the conclusion was in this very short 2-year window, the trends are encouraging. We're not seeing, at least again, in a very short period, significant impacts of the BIFIC program on the overall bird community. Yes, certain species do show some impacts, but overall it's positive. I think that could be a conclusion too. That's not mentioned in the conclusion for this, Renee. So, but I think considering the goals of what we're trying to understand in this treatment versus control comparison, that's a really encouraging step, right? I would say.
Absolutely. We were definitely happy to see there wasn't this widespread negative result across all these treatment types. And when you think about the different habitat needs and food needs and how birds are distributed across the landscape, it is not a surprising result necessarily, because birds do respond very differently to structural and species composition changes in their habitats. And so we wouldn't necessarily expect them to all respond in the same way, but those overall bird community results being positive or neutral was certainly encouraging.
Good comment.
Yeah, and I think, in addition to just continuing the triennial long-term monitoring that we're doing, continuing to look at the impacts of BIFIP over longer periods, obviously inform our work a lot, and just add to the science of wildfire risk management versus conservation. So thanks for that. Terry, any public comments?
Just one more quick comment. Yeah, it'd be great, Sean and Carl, if you can, at some future meeting, bring forward how you plan to use this data that would impact your work.
Great. Public comments, Terry?
Yes, we have several. Mr. Larry Minikis and then Terry Thomas. There.
Yes, good morning. And it's really encouraging to see studies done, not just on endangered species, but on species in general. And as I've been advocating for years here, I would really like to see us do studies on small creatures and the impact on lizards and snakes and other small voles and items, creatures like this, because a lot of birds depend on these creatures for their food. And I've always spoken to the fact that there's a lot of creatures that are getting run over on the watershed, on our fire roads, and we simply do not know the cumulative impact. These are just regular everyday creatures. I'm talking about small snakes, fence lizards, these kind of animals, and it would be really helpful to understand the human impact on these animals over time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas, and then Mr. Bill Keene.
Hi, this is Terry Thomas again. Wow, you guys, this is just so great. Again, I just want to applaud you. You're really a leader in the county on this one. There isn't anybody else that I know that's doing anything like it. And you're using good data for your approach to watershed management, which is really great. I must also say you're uniquely poised for this study because of the long-term data set that you had that started decades and decades ago, and your choice of Point Blue. And I also want to thank Diana and her team at Point Blue. Great work, as well as Sean and Carl for their leadership. We really need more of these long-term data sets, and that's how we find out if our management is doing good things. And in this case, it's doing good things. So that's really great news. Secondly, I just wanted to ask basic clarification. And again, this can be in an email later, but I wanted to get from staff and consultants. It sounded like what Renee was saying was that the robin and the western flycatcher were decreasing overall, and that's why they were in the annual, but not in the treated landscape, well, except in a minor case, I think. But I think that in a way is a conclusion, because in a way, and I don't know how true this is, that's why I'm kind of asking Renee and Carl and Sean, in a way you're saying that those species are not affected by or almost beneficially affected by the treatment, because they're going down in all of the other sites in Marin County, or the general approach is negative, but not in the treated sites. So that I just wanted to clarify if I heard that correctly. And the second thing is that with regard to the chickadee and the junco and the scrub jay, which are the ones that did go down, but were overall positive, if there was any next step you could take, and I'm not saying you should manage for these 3 species at all, but I'm saying that if those 3 species have something in common, oops, sorry, that is not damaging to your treatment, it would be nice to know if there's something that could be done to help that particular group of species that may have the same negative response that would make it not negative. Did that make sense? My phone rang in the middle of that comment, so I got distracted. But basically, if there's something that isn't necessarily for those 3 species, but if those 3 species show a similar reason for decrease, if you could look at your management actions and see if that reason might be able to be applied from a management perspective. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Next is Mr. Bill Keene and then Barbara Salzman.
We need to turn this. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I want to commend staff and Point Blue. Excellent work. Excellent work. I would have thought that the impacts would be much greater given the level of work that gets done in the vegetation management program. And hearing this just tells me we should scale this up more. I mean, we have this risk. We know it's there. And this is just telling us that the impacts are pretty minor to birds. So let's try to and I actually like the idea that the scrub jay gets a little bit of a punch in the gut, given what I see it do to other birds. I also want this board just to keep this in mind when we get to talk about the rec issues. All this disturbance on land is really not affecting the birds. So anyway, but I'll say more later.
Thank you. Ms. Salzman and then Mr. Renee Voss, please.
Hi. Yes, great study. And it's important that it be expanded to include impacts of fire to add to the long-term study. I've been concerned about the impact on ground nesting and feeding birds. And it's kind of interesting that the ground dependent birds seem to have a mixed result. So I'd be interested in knowing more about that. But in general, I'm looking forward. I think it is a very complicated study, and I wasn't able to grasp everything that I'm interested in knowing from this presentation. So I'm interested in reviewing the actual report, and I would encourage you to expand the study to include especially spotted owls, since they're so dependent on your habitats, and perhaps other species that are unique to Marin and your lands. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Voss, please.
Yeah, thank you. Great job, Point Blue and Renee. I I definitely confirm that you guys are doing something more than the other agencies. MWPA and even Marin County Open Space District haven't really been dealing with the abundance issue. And talk to them about trying to get that going. I would like to caution anybody to make any conclusions based on this data. However, this is data from 2019 and 2022, and it's my impression that most of the vegetation management work, as far as acreage, has been done since 2022. I'd like to see a comparison of what's been done between those dates from 2019 to 2022 versus 2022 to 2025. I think that we really can't make any conclusions until we see the larger picture, especially if there's a greater amount of vegetation management that's been done since the 2022 survey data. I think this data needs to be hopefully presented as soon as possible, as early as in early 2026, so we can get a sense of whether the treatments are having a sort of that there's a trend or there's a, the amount of treatment is affecting the land birds. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Great. Thanks for all the public inputs. I think we all can see everyone just wants to learn more. So hopefully we can keep that going. And anything else, Sean?
Yeah, we'll just say with next steps for this, the district's moving forward with our triannual bird surveys this coming year. So a lot of work to be done. We're starting to ask questions of what can be included in the next study that will be done in that interim period between the triannual frequency. So we'll come back with the additional reports on this as that becomes available.
Thank you. And with that, thanks, Renee. And we'll move on to agenda item 4E, which is an update on our watershed recreation management planning feasibility study.
Directors, we're going to be joined with John Fouché, our watershed maintenance supervisor for this item, and we've got another presentation that we'll walk through with you. So we're going to provide a bit of an update on what's been completed under our watershed recreation planning feasibility study, and then some of the next steps in it, as well as an update on our roads and trails plan, which was identified as a next step in that document. So a little background on what has been done with the community and the conversations we've been having and the things we've identified through that feasibility study. We'll talk through some of the recently completed efforts that were identified in that, and then we want to do a little bit of a deep dive into our roads and trails management plan and look at kind of what that's guided and the types of work that we've done in the past, the current work we're completing under it, and then plan updates as we identified in that feasibility study. So you've seen this, but just a reminder, there's been this robust conversation going on with the community since 2019 about recreation on the watershed, a really complicated issue with different opinions. We've been trying to bring folks together through workshops and having conversations on, strategic topics that we thought we needed to start building bridges. We've had individual stakeholder meetings throughout that time period regularly to get direct input on how people are thinking about the watershed and the district's management of it. All of that led into these two documents, the e-bike CAC and then the watershed feasibility study. The feasibility study identified a whole host of strategic opportunities that can be brought forward to continue to improve in a proactive manner how people are connecting with and their visitation to the watershed. That effort has been guiding some of our recent actions, and so we're going to highlight some of those and then go into some of the next steps that were identified there as well. One that you've heard a lot about is the Azalea Hill Trail Restoration Project. We've completed the Liberty Gulch Multi-Use Trail that opened in May. This was a significant undertaking by our watershed maintenance group and our volunteers to construct this. We're still continuing work on the hiking trail, so that's underway. We recently completed some work with CC&B and CCC on that effort. And then as Lauren mentioned briefly, some of our contracts that you approved today have some additional capacity to support with our trail work. The next stage on that project is going to be designing a parking lot kiosk at the Bolinas Fairfax Road. So our engineering group is actually helping develop that with us currently, and that's something we'll be moving forward with in the next year or so. National Trails Day event happened on June 7th. We had about 40 volunteers in our maintenance group and our volunteer program hosted that. We did improvements on some of the Cataract Trail features, including bridges, causeways, steps, and some of the trail tread. Really appreciating the good work that we saw out there from our volunteers, and it was a really important step. There's a lot of other interpretive and volunteer events that have been carried out over the last quarter that align with the feasibility outcomes, those being our turtle observer program, our frog docents, some of our restoration activities, including trail stewardship and habitat restoration. There's been guided wildlife walks and fishing with a ranger, nature journaling, and then we had an Earth Day habitat restoration event with Marin Stables. The Water District has also become kind of a beacon for field trips for conferences recently. So we hosted a field trip for the Together Bay Area Conference to highlight some of the forest resiliency work that's been completed. We had over 50 participants in that field trip from other agencies across the Bay Area and grant funding agencies as well. Similarly, the California Wildfire and Forest Resiliency Task Force was hosted by MWPA, and the OneTAM partners all had field trips as part of that. And we had a whole host of folks from across the state coming to look at the work that the district has been doing, and really just with those field trips, overarching positive responses from folks who are seeing the scale and the type of work that's being applied to the landscape here in Marin. Also, the e-bike class 1 pilot program, was approved by the board in a revised manner at the last meeting. We have a launch period of July 1st for that. So staff has been undertaking a whole series of data collection efforts and getting aligned to move that forward. Some of those include installing trail counters at some of our primary entrances. Rangers have been improving signage, and those will be installed at some of our kiosk locations. Visitor experience survey will come in the fall. We've also been updating our social trail map, and we'll continue our monitoring efforts with our rangers for that. We're revisiting our early detection rapid response and kind of focusing it in on our fire roads for the next couple of years. A bat study, we've brought a consultant on, and we'll be launching an acoustic monitoring program. And then we have our northern spotted owl with Point Blue that we'll be continuing to conduct on an annual basis. So those are just the updates on kind of elements that have been coming out of the feasibility study. And now we're going to hone in on our Mount Tam Watershed Roads and Trails Management Plan. One of the items identified in that feasibility study planning process was the opportunity to update that document strategically, to think about bike access and making improvements more broadly to how the district manages our social trails and restorative elements and stewardship actions we could carry out. So just the one pager here, cliff notes of the Roads and Trails Management Plan. It has the 3 primary goals: improve water quality and minimize sediment into the creeks and reservoir. The second goal is to reduce the impacts of the road and trail network on sensitive habitat and special status plant and animal species, and also to reduce the impacts of the road and trail network on the watershed's natural ecological function.
Sean, can I just a quick question? You said strategically update the Road and Trails Management Plan. Are a good chunk of the components right now still providing benefit to the district?
Yeah, so we're going to walk through how the district is currently using the management plan and what's relevant to the type of stewardship work that we're doing to maintain that road and trail network, and talk kind of specifically around things that could be updated in it and things that could be retained from it.
Great, thank you.
So the road and trail plan management elements, if you will, if you go through this planning document, there's a classification system that outlines the classification of our roads and trails. That's the 2 tables to the right. They're a little bit hard to see. The one thing that was identified in the feasibility planning study is under our trail classification, there's a class 10 that was preserved for future use that does not have a mileage associated with it and could be considered for a bike access type of trail. And then there's the road classification system as well. There's design standards. These schematics kind of provide examples of those that are outlined that give staff guidance on how we maintain our roads and trails. There's work plan guidelines for how we conduct our work on an annual basis. And then there's a whole suite of best management practices and environmental measures, as well as some public-facing components such as signage, public information, and outreach strategies that could be carried out. So that's the Roads and Trails Management Plan in its current form, and it's a key document to how the district carries out its work. And so to give you a bit of context on how we're using the document and how it's still relevant, we wanted John Fouché, who manages our Roads and Trails program, to kind of walk you through the types of work that we've been able to do under it in the past and then currently as well. So this slide he's going to walk you all through really speaks to how the district has used this document over time.
Good morning. Yes, in the past 20 years, this has driven our work. It's still quite relevant. Basically, it was a sediment reduction plan. It identified culverts and road segments that had a lot of sediment loading that were going to degrade water quality. Initial work focused on reducing inputs into salmotid bearing streams, example, Upper Lag Creek, Redwood Creek watersheds that drain through Muir Woods. It was important in establishing project restore programs to address social trails and support their decommission, keep folks out trail use, hiking, and other uses. It guided decommissioning of redundant fire roads, specifically out in the Kent Lake region, Grassy Slope, Upper Peters Dam. It eliminated some sediment, kind of bad offenders that were just, the segments weren't used any longer, they weren't needed. It also addressed hydrological connectivity along fire roads through installation of BMPs, specifically rolling dips, outsloping, hardening the structure, hardening the road surface, and improving stream crossings with upgraded culverts and rock crossings. Also fire access, maintain access critical. It identified our water distribution facilities, pipes in the ground, pump stations, treatment plants, and then emergency response, which fire crews, engines, and water tenders that they have access in an emergency. We have a crew out today on Pine Mountain Road, ensuring that that road is open for fire season. And then trails were also a component in there, and it was maintain trails as needed and address critical failures during, storm events. So critical failure, we would go up and repair those issues.
And one of the real benefits of the district developing the roads and trails plan was it was our first kind of attempt to get our arms around all of the roads and trails on the watershed through an inventory process that's still relevant today. We are not talking about in an update redoing our entire trail network or road system, right? So the that inventory that is in that 2005 document is still what we are managing as our kind of geographically centric part of the watershed. So that's a real important component of retaining that and understanding that these actions that we've carried out over the years are still the types of actions that we'll continue to do on the watershed and in various locations as needed. And then in terms of current work,
yeah, here's some examples of work we've done. The slide just showing replacing, rotten, rusted out culverts, undersized, restoring them with a thicker gauge corrugated metal pipe that'll last longer. They're resilient to wildfire. We're hardening. Let's picture an outslope culvert, hardening the surface, rolling dip construction, and then also other targeted maintenance of our fire and trail system. I believe that's Azalea Hill or maybe Old Stage. We did a lot of work initially, Old Stage, Old Railroad grade, and on the south side, Gravity Car Fire Road. And we've also expanded Bontempi Alpine Pump Road, Phoenix Lake, and Warren Springs as well, and also Fish Grade. So this Road and Trails Management guided that work.
And real critical to what we're currently working on is we have over 700 culverts on the watershed, and the district took a couple of years to assess all of the conditions of those culverts to drive our current work plan, which is to replace 105 of the most egregious culverts. Those could be undersized. We have culverts on the watershed that were old water lines that were never sized for the watershed that they're supporting. So there's a tremendous effort going on right now to upsize those undersized features, in some cases to remove them and put rolling dips in if we can. The roads and trails document has been the environmental compliance document that's supported us in getting the permits to do that work. And so we have about 5.5 years left under those permits and the roads and trails document to implement that work that we've currently pulled. So a huge undertaking right now that we're focused on the culverts for improving the hydrological conditions.
The Roads and Trails Management Plan also helped us with the amendment for the Azalea Hill initial study, mitigate negative deck to allow us to do all this important work out here. It's a multi-use trail construction. These photos, it was a significant effort to get all these bridges in, remote locations, engineered drawings. We did it in-house, contracted some work out, volunteer events, district crews, California Conservation Corps North Bay. So this enabled us to get out there and do this important work.
So roads and trails document, right, we built off of it in this case, and that was a key feature that we could do for a specific project. The Azalea Hill project was providing multi-use access. We appreciate that it didn't kind of maybe achieve the type of bike experience that some folks are looking for. Some of the lessons that we can learn from this is that when you build a multi-use trail, that trail is going to take longer to construct and it's going to be more costly, right? That's what we definitely saw as we implemented this project. We were successful in getting a $1 million grant to help us and then grants from CC&B as well for labor. That probably isn't something we should expect for all the trail projects we take on. And we should consider that, the size of the trail will influence, how long it takes to construct and the total overall cost.
Sean, can you just elaborate on the cost a little bit more? You said the multi-use trail is going to be much more expensive compared to.
Right. So if you were building a single use trail and a smaller footprint of a trail, you're going to have a much lower cost. If you're able to perhaps reutilize, features on the landscape, like a fire road that maybe is no longer needed, or a trail that could be repurposed, or a social trail, there's kind of these tools that merging those kind of three things together for a new type of trail might be less costly and easier to construct than building an entirely new trail for a multi-use purpose. So staff has thought a lot about like how we're using the roads and trails plan, and we're trying to demonstrate through, just a few brief slides that there's a lot of tools within that document that are still relevant and needed for us to maintain our roads and trails system on the watershed. We're also thinking strategically about what could be updated to better support the district's stewardship. And one thing the roads and trails management plan did, it scoped really well kind of priorities for social trail closure or restoration. But at the time, we probably were very ambitious in our scoping of that. And over time, things change. So we have started to prioritize the closure of social trails that are newly opened, right? When you have folks using social trails for a long period of time, they become kind of normalized and harder to close down. And so what our rangers have done a great job of is really focusing in on when they see new trails, trying to address those early. And so there are some social trail priorities in the current plan that haven't been met yet. And one of the updates that we think would be strategic would be to rethink which social trails have the largest environmental impact, and then prioritizing some said number of closures based on that and what we can achieve over some period of time. So that would be kind of a targeted update there. The classification system, as I mentioned, there was this classification 10. Obviously, folks, when they wrote this document, were thinking about bike access, but they didn't build it into the plan quite yet, so it was retained for future use. One opportunity now could be to look at that future use and bike access and that experience that folks are looking for, and try to come up with that bike trail standard that could fit that classification. The roads and trails design standards that we highlighted, those are all still relevant, used. You see them in a lot of other planning documents. We would be suggesting to retain those and move those forward and keep them in the current plan. The work plan could be refreshed, and so that would be a really good way for us to target a geographic and a scope with really clear outcomes of what we can achieve over the next 5 years or so. And then there's been a tremendous amount of discussion and conversation around stewardship through the feasibility study, and this is a great opportunity for us to kind of integrate the outcomes of that feasibility study into our roads and trails plan moving forward. So those are kind of the updates that staff sees currently. And what we're thinking is that at the September 18th Watershed Committee meeting, what we'd do is have a preliminary workshop for early input. Staff would then take that to develop a request for proposals for the Roads and Trails Management Plan update. And then we would establish a consulting contract in the fall of winter that we'd bring back for board review. And that would kick off our planning process for the update to the Roads and Trails Plan. So with that, we'll take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, John. Jed, you want to start us off?
Sure, thank you. First, I'm going to give 2 shout outs to Terry Thomas as being the first person to bring to my attention the importance of this road and trails plan and the importance of updating it. So thank you for taking the next steps, Sean and team. This, I hope, will help us both better manage our land, the habitat, and the recreational use of that land. I hope that the public comes away from this meeting with a keen understanding of our appreciation and empathy towards taking care of our lands, and the use of science-based approach to better protect both our native species and the habitat. I have to say that, especially with some of the plaintiffs that I believe are on the phone and other folks who have used courts and lawsuits to sue our agency and others over time, that since I've been on this board in the last 2.5 years, these lawsuits have cost our customers enormous amounts of money, to the tune, I think, of $40 or $50 per customer. That to settle these issues. And this is not just for the environmental stuff, but other lawsuits that have been brought forward. But having met with the environmental community and some of the folks that are on the phone before the previous lawsuit, I was really surprised that they ended up suing us, because we are a thoughtful, listening organization. And if they had worked with us, I am highly confident we could have solved some of the problems in other ways. And I find that tactic is a disappointing tactic. And I hope in the future that they will not use the court system to do that, but they will recognize that you have a listening board that wants to do well. And we should be proud of what we're doing. I hope coming out of this work, not only will there be more thoughtful use of recreation, but we'll also look at reducing some of the social trails that have been created, potentially creating some long-term permanent wild lands on our land. So both the use of land and protection of land will be introduced into this, and that we can come out of this with some very thoughtful environmental impact on all of the different approaches that we use to both change use of some of these trails, as well as ongoing use. So thank you for doing this. I really look forward to September and to our next steps.
Thank you, Jed. Matt.
Great. Thanks, Rajiv. Sean and the team, again, thank you very much for the presentation and again for highlighting all the work that you guys do that mostly goes unseen quite a bit, especially with the culvert piece. When you talked about the social trail impacts on the watershed, those are obviously outside of what we're trying to manage for. No studies were done when those went in. We don't understand the impact to the community. So taking the same approach as you're doing with the culverts makes a lot of sense, identifying the top offenders and then start knocking them off one by one as we move down. And I think you could probably use that same mindset for some of the decommissioning of fire roads, the redundant ones already, and see if we can start looking at opportunities on those as we move forward too. The question I have on the class 10 possibility or category of a type of road or trail, you mentioned a bike trail standard. How would that apply to existing trails on the watershed?
Yeah, so the thought is that the trail classification system is used to identify which trails allow which use. And so the bike trail standard would be used for that classification, and the trails for that use would be identified as part of that process as well.
Okay, so it would be an evaluation of the current stock as well to see what would meet the determined standard. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Diana?
Can you come back to me?
Yep. Larry does Larry have his hand up, Terry?
No.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. Yeah, thanks for this. Sean, this proposal to update the RTMP, I think, yeah, Terry?
He does now.
Okay. All right. I'll stop. Let's let Larry
Okay.
jump in.
Go ahead, Director Russell. Go ahead, Director Russell.
Hang on. I was just going to say I'm cool with what they're doing. It looks good. And it's, as you can, getting a feel for, guys, it's complicated subjects. So thank y'all.
Thanks, Larry. But so Sean, what I was trying to say is just your proposal here to update the RTMP so that we can continue to build upon all of the effort that went into the full RTMP rather than putting that aside and recreating a lot of information that we already have seems very important to me. Updating the RTMP now to incorporate the Recreation Management Plan feasibility study findings so that we can move on those as well seems very important to me. So I like this approach that you've presented of combining all of the work that we've already done on various areas, whether it's recreation, road trail management plan, to move as efficiently now with the elements of stewardship and recreation that we would all like to see evolve on the watershed. So thanks again for really coming up with what I feel is the most efficient mechanisms for moving forward on these topics of recreation and stewardship. It's a great plan.
Rajiv, can I just make another comment? I think it's important to reinforce that fact that we're talking about here, that the document still provides relevancy. We're not going out and acquiring new trails to put into this. So why put all the energy in to something that's most likely to produce the same result as opposed to update it moving forward? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so great strategy. Diana, did you want to add anything?
I guess just a couple thoughts. When I looked at this planning background, and I actually called Sean last night and talked to him about a bunch of things on this presentation, I just struck by how much thought and research and work and attempts, at least, to really get with our people. And by our people, I mean all stakeholders and constituents. I'm so appreciative of that. I'm so appreciative of all the work you do, Sean. And I guess I'm feeling some of what Jed is feeling, which is like, God, what more can we do here? And as an attorney, I just, I do feel like we live in a very litigious world. And I mean, the reason I mediate cases these days is because I don't think litigation solves any problems. It might in the short term, and in the long term, I think it just creates more. So what I really think we maybe are still perfecting is how we engage everybody so that they feel heard, and then at the end of the day, people are better able to accept they're not going to get everything they want. And at the same time, I am really encouraged that I do think it's a real win that we are going to officially now allow e-bikes on the watershed for a period of time and check out what that does. And I guess lastly, I would just say that although I agree, and I think there's a lot more, studies we could do and all of the things we're doing and the impact on wildlife. I have to say, as we were talking about the pile burn and the impact on the owls, I know we live in a bubble, but I'm so happy I live in my bubble, because when I think about what's going on in the world today, in our country, and how people don't even recognize climate change, like, let's zoom out for a moment, people, and think about how great it is, at least, that we live in this county. We don't always do it perfectly, but we really try and be thoughtful about what we're doing, and not just the impact on the human population, but on the sentient population that's not human. And I'm just really appreciative for that. So thank you.
Can I ask one more
Yeah.
question? So, Sean, one of your next steps here is at the Watershed Committee meeting in September, we talked about looking for early public input. This is a really critical component for this, I think, in terms of outreach. So as much outreach as we can do to this, however that looks, to make sure that everybody in the public understands that this is the venue from which you can provide input on, and we can do it all in one place. It wouldn't be the only one, but it's a really good place to start. So please, if anyone has input for this, it's the September Watershed meeting.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And with that, we'll open it up for public comment.
Yes, I have a few speakers: Bill Keene, Andrew Levine, and Vernon Huffman.
Thank you, and good morning again, board. I just want to echo what a couple have said about the lawsuit. As a ratepayer, to know that all these organizations were involved in the process, the rec management plan process, and still chose to sue, and that you had to pay $100 and something thousand in attorney's fees, the only ones who are winning are the lawyers. I mean, that's clear. And I also just, when I read the briefs, the legal briefs, it's very clear that the idea of environmental impact, and it's not quantified, it's not really enumerated very well in the plaintiff's briefs. And that was disappointing. What I can really get behind that were in those briefs is safety. So I've got a solution for you on these trails. Odd even. There's no safety issue if we go to odd even. So odd days, you can hike without any worry of somebody biking. And on even days, there might be a bike there. So if you're out there, you might see a bike. And I think if we go to something like that, we eliminate the safety issue. With that said, it's not every trail is going to be open to multi-use. We know that. So we want to work with you. Access for Bikes and MCBC, I'm sure, is in there too. We want to work with you on a reasonable set of trails that have good sight lines and could be open to bikes. And if you want to hike on those even days when bikes might be out there, there will be hike-only trails. And if you want to bike on those odd days when you can't ride those trails that are open to both, we can have bike-only trails. And I think that that class 10 is a place to do that. I think this is a reasonable approach. It's one that addresses that safety issue, which I would have as a hiker if I were on those trails too. I don't necessarily want to be out there when bikes are there on certain trails. But if I knew that they're only going to be out there on certain days, what's the harm? So you've addressed that issue completely. I do also just want to address the timing. Can we do this quickly? I'm 56 going on 80. You know, it's like I want to bike on some of these trails at some point. Azalea Hills, I really appreciate that that's been put in place, but it's not really the experience that bikers are looking for. So I look forward to working with you all, and thank you for taking some steps to move this forward.
Thank you. Mr. Andrew Levine?
Hello. I appreciate the pragmatic approach that looks like you're taking for the RTMP, and that's great. I appreciate that. I think we should extend that to everything. I agree wholeheartedly with what Jed was saying about the lawsuits, and that, you know, we put in this 7 years of work on this stuff, and now we're kind of starting over. Let's try to not do that again. So as part of being pragmatic, let's recognize that there will likely be legal challenges. Let's move quickly so we can get through this, and it's not another 7 years. 7 years ago, my disease had not progressed to the point where I needed a cane and can, you know, barely walk, but I can ride my bike around. In another 7, I might not be able to do that either. So I'm asking, for me, a person who was riding on these trails legally a half a century ago, and that went away, asking if you can, you know, please move quickly and be thoughtful of the steps you take, so that you know there will be opponents, you know the tactics they will take. Let's try to make this happen so that I get an opportunity to enjoy the watershed legally in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vernon Huffman and Danny Poe?
Greetings and thank you, supervisors, directors. Vernon Huffman, Access for Bikes, here to represent a pretty large user group here. And to you know, Jed, thank you for your comments. And, you know, Liberty Gulch was approved as an amendment to the RTMP. It was not these current litigants did not demand a new RTMP to proceed with Liberty Gulch. It's particularly the fact that they were adding UTVs to a single track, a fisherman's trail. The proposal was to add 65-inch wide UTVs that weigh 1,500 pounds. And when you look at the bridges that were installed, these litigants approved this project, but we can't approve a bike on a trail because they claim an impact. It's pretty hard to understand, but I think I do understand. I think it's about discrimination against bikes, and I think these litigants don't want to share. So we do propose that we update Title IX and we update the 2005 RTMP, and we do utilize Class X to create a pathway for bikes on trails. And we do believe that by doing so, we will create a programmatic approach. And I don't believe we need to just go figure out every trail that's appropriate. I think a programmatic approach is doing this step by step. Let's find something that we think will work, and let's go do it. And Access for Bikes is happy to help, and we're happy to have every single project be self-mitigating. We can go out on these trails as we did, as we got ready for the pilot trails. We can go out and we can look for non-sustainable function of a trail. We can find a place of erosion or vegetation that needs management or special plant species, and we can go around it. We can help you with that. That's what we do. We create sustainable access for our users. So we're here to help. You know, we do great rock work. We do great structural work. We're thoughtful. We're low impact. I mean, our principles are sound, and your own staff, John, right here, we worked together out on Liberty Gulch, and the crew was super impressed with our what we brought to the table. So much so that they were able to walk away and let us work and really create valuable stuff. So let's do it. I think September is unacceptable. I mean, how long are we supposed to wait here? I just can't even believe that was brought to the table today, September. As everyone has said, I'm 58. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to do it. So I just want to ride trails and ride it, legally. So thank you for your work on the e-bike class 1 pilot trails, or the pilot trail period.
have
Yep.
a few
And I'll be at the meetings and I'll be there to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Donnie Poe, Jack, and Renee Voss, please.
Again, hi. Nobody can thank you more than the biking community for all the efforts that you put in to make recreation part of Marin Municipal Water District. And the damage that we do, that we're claimed to have done, doesn't even come close to the amount of work that we've done. The balance, Access for Bikes has 30, 40, 50 people that come out every time you guys need a help to maintain the trails, to pull broom, to put in rock creation so that we don't have washout. The work that we do to enhance the trail can never be compared to the damage that a bicycle does on a trail. I'm 77 years old, and I couldn't go out to my church, is what I call the forest. I couldn't go anymore until you guys said that e-bikes can go. And now I can go again. And about the litigation thing, the months, the years that you guys put in, the open meetings, communication, all the stockholders coming up saying whatever they felt, and we get along to a place to where we pass a meeting that's going to let pilot trails come into play. And on the 23rd hour of the day, we get hit by a surprise lawsuit after all the communication that's been going on. Why can't people be open in the first place? Why do they have to be sneaky? Thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Mr. Poe. Jack, and then okay. Hold on, please. Let me switch over to Mr. Vos. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Vos.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that the Roads and Trails Management Fund is back on track, and the course correction after the litigation. I just wanted to push back a little bit on the concept that litigation is not appropriate sometimes. I think the fact that these groups had to bring this case, I think, was a last resort thing because of the complete failure to listen to their input. These issues were raised. Unfortunately, the pilot was sprung and had a very short period. The fact that there was a preliminary injunction and a ruling saying that the plaintiffs would likely succeed on the merits of this case means that the litigation was sound. And if you compare the proposal that was made with the ultimate settlement, it's a radically different outcome. It's nothing like what was proposed. And that shows that this was a complete failure by the planning folks to anticipate what the outcome should be. And to have, conservative group like Marin Conservation League, and I was involved with the litigation. I was really surprised that it happened. To have a group like that sue it just shows you that there was something seriously wrong. I did try to help get the board and the staff to listen early on. And I definitely did not get the sense that they were listening. So I think the litigation is a good check on when there is a complete failure and breakdown on considering people's input. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, thanks for all the comments and input. Sean, I just wanted to note that the amount of effort that has gone into planning for this meeting, when I think about all the topics that you and your team have prepared for today, from wildfire pathway modeling to maintenance contracts, monitoring impacts of the BIFIP, to now the next steps with the recreational study. Just pulling all of this together is no small feat. So thanks a lot for that. And thank you for making this a really worthwhile, meaningful meeting. And with that, we will adjourn.
Thanks, Jack.